Good. Well, let me just say what this report is all about. It was very late in the project. The project started in 1958, and this report is written in 1963, September 1963. Ted Taylor, the original chief who ran it for the first 5 years, had already left. So it's a report to the people at Huntsville, Alabama. That means the people who are running the Apollo program, as to whether Orion could be of any use to them. It was sort of a desperate attempt to try to find a justification for Orion. We were all young, and we not only thought of building the ship, we expected to fly and actually to go ourselves to visit the planets. Before the war, I think we all really expected to die. We felt that we were doomed. We all believed that World War II would really be the total disaster. We had this picture from Aldous Huxley of the anthrax bombs. Anthrax bombs were very much talked about. So we expected if there was another war, we would die of some horrible diseases, and that was all we could look forward to, well, you might find some other way of dealing with the problem. That was the idea. We had also the example of Gandhi, who at the same time, Gandhi was a pacifist and was doing very well. He had this amazing gift of being able to fight the British Empire with peaceful methods and win. And that was, of course, something we admired very much. I was, of course, against the British Empire, as most of the young people were. We saw the empire as something that had no future, and the sooner it disappeared, the better. So there seemed to be several reasons why pacifism made sense. So I was against the war when it started. We imagined it to be like World War I, just more of that kind of trench fighting, millions of people getting killed for no purpose. And I always said all we need is to talk to Hitler face to face, and we can come to some kind of a peace. Simply passive resistance is what it needs. Well, then, of course, France collapsed and was occupied by the Germans. And you could see then what would happen, that in France there were a lot of pacifists who really didn't want to fight the war because for moral reasons, but there were also collaborators who would like to get along with the Germans because they could make money out of it and could exploit the German occupation for their own purposes. And you couldn't tell the difference. It was clear pacifism failed because there was no way you could tell whether somebody was a sincere pacifist or a collaborator. So it became meaningless to be a pacifist under those conditions. And I could see if England were trying to make peace with the Germans, the same thing would happen, that you'd have a lot of English people would also be collaborators, and the pacifism would have its moral force destroyed. I was working for the bombing campaign, bombing of Germany, as a scientist, and I thought, what would you call now an intelligence analyst? So I was sitting in an office at the headquarters of Bomber Command, collecting information. That was my job. I knew much more about what was really happening than the politicians who were running it. So I had this view of that campaign, which was a total tragedy from every point of view. It killed a huge number of Germans, of course, mostly women and children, and at the same time killed a lot of our young boys who were flying the airplanes, and did very little real military damage to the Germans. And it had a very small effect on the war until the last few months. And so it was, I got this very strong view of war at its worst in a way. I mean, it was just a very brutal campaign, which in the end ruined huge numbers of lives and had very little effect on history. And anyhow, warfare, in fact, has been much less widespread in recent times than it was even 200 years ago. I mean, we hear all about terrible fighting in Syria and Afghanistan and a little bit in the Ukraine. And the wars are, of course, now much more visible because everywhere there is fighting, you have television and you have everybody all over the world sees what is happening. So it looks as though the world is fighting more, but actually we are fighting much less. 200 years ago, there were bigger wars and more wars going on the average. There have been long periods of peace over big parts of the world. And I think the progress is certainly in the right direction, and the fact that when you do have fighting, that everybody sees it happening is good. We are much more aware of how horrible it is. There are not so many people now who think of war as something glorious. after the war was over, I mean, we were just very lucky we had survived and things weren't so bad. So after that, I always felt very hopeful about the way things were going. Yes, we've planned the first mission to be to Mars, and so that would have been something like a 4-year trip. 1 year to get to Mars, 2 years to explore the planet, and 1 year to come home, something like that. And the second trip would have been out further to the satellites of Jupiter and Saturn, where we could also land and explore as many satellites as we could. And so that was the second mission. I think that would have been reasonable. The second mission would have taken more like 5 years. And we planned it at the time that we started the project in 1958, and we planned to be on Mars in 7 years and to be on satellites of Saturn by 12 years. And I think if we had full support from the government, we probably could have done that. But of course, that was assuming everything worked the way we expected, not having any disasters. Oh yes, and certainly it would have been a risky operation. But in that respect, about the same as with Darwin. I mean, Darwin certainly took risks when he went on his voyage. we are in the middle roughly speaking, in the middle of the lifetime of our planet. So even on this planet we have another 5 billion years, and within the universe altogether probably much longer. And we invented cultural evolution. So in a way, we are the pioneers in that completely new kind of evolution based on culture rather than on genes. So the future is going to be very different from the past. So that puts us in a very special position. We do have a big role to play in the future, since we are starting a new experiment in how to organize life. And instead of being a random process, it's a directed process. It's up to us to just decide how to use it, and that's a big responsibility. So we are, in a way, sort of the midwives for the birth of a new kind of living. And it could very well be that the universe is quite different as a result. And what life has done to this planet will also spread into the rest of the universe. When you're talking about human problems, they will all be changed very fast as soon as this happens. When life is spread out in 1,000 different places, then everyone is then free to choose what kind of a society to live in. And so it means that the world suddenly is just enormously larger than we've been accustomed to recently. Jalochowski was this Russian school teacher who understood before anybody else how important it would be for life to expand in the universe. And that was his way of looking at it, that he saw there were two problems. The problem of engineering, that is to make a spaceship that will actually fly into space and go fast enough to get there, to wherever you want to go. That's the engineering problem. But then the more interesting and more difficult problem is the biology problem. That is, how do you actually live when you're out in space? How do people really become at home? Or not just people, but life become at home in the universe, away from planets? And for Jalochowski, that second problem was really the important one. And I think that is still true. When you look now at the different space cultures that exist, there are roughly 2 space cultures in the world now. And Robert Goddard, who was the pioneer of space in the United States, was an engineer. And so he thought of machines all the time, built rockets. That was what he understood. And so the whole United States space program has been dominated by engineers. It's extremely good for unmanned missions, for automatic spacecraft with instruments that go and observe the universe. That's the thing the United States does well. And that's the best way to do science. On the other side, you have Russia, which has been all the time following Tsiolkovsky's point of view, which is much longer range. They think in centuries, not in decades. I went to visit a space launch quite recently at Baikonur, which is the Russian space launch place, and my daughter happens to be a cosmonaut, and she got trained in Russia to fly in space. So we all went to watch the launch, and it is like a religious ceremony. The town of Baikonur is actually the sort of the center of the Russian space culture, and so the whole town participates. When the day of launching comes, the cosmonauts parade through the city, and everybody comes out on the street and cheers when they go by. Then they have big speeches in the town square, and there's an Orthodox priest there to give them his blessing, and then they march from the city, they march out to the launch site, and it doesn't really much matter what they're doing when they go up. It's the activity itself that is precious, and when you talk to the Russians about what they're doing, it's not this particular mission that is interesting, but just we're on our way to the stars. We are going to the stars, and maybe it takes 500 years, but anyway, we're on our way, and so I think that's what you have to do if you really want a manned program with people in space. And people aren't good for doing science. They're only good if they're going to stay in space and use space as a place to live, which is what ultimately will happen, but it will take a long time.
Okay, engine stop. APA at a descent. Mode control both auto, descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
The moon program
You're looking good here.
was supposed to do both. It was supposed to be an adventure for the people in going to the moon, and also to be doing science. And the two things really don't mix. It was sold under false pretenses, and that's why it failed. And so it was started by Kennedy as a 10-year program. He said, we will do this in 10 years, take a man to the moon and bring him back safely in 10 years, and that was it. And nothing said about sustaining it afterwards. And the Russians always thought much more of a sustainable program, less oriented toward science. But Apollo was a tragedy because of that. I mean, it was such a big effort.
11, Houston, you did great work there. We're ready to spin it up, over.
And it was a dead end, and nothing came of it. So it has, in a way, held up progress.
Houston, did you copy, over?
So well, I would say there were two romantic periods. There were the Apollo period, where people still believed in this as a sort of international sporting event, which really was exciting, and everybody was watching to see who would get to the moon first. And so, I mean, it was a big success as a sporting event. And then the second period, which is what we're sort of living through today, when the instruments have just become so wonderfully capable that a mission like Kepler discovered 2,000 planets just with one little rocket. And so that's now a romantic period that we're in. But of course, it took longer than we hoped, and I had imagined that we would be all over the solar system by now, and of course we are not. And so it's a little bit more difficult than we imagined. Yes, at that time it just happened that I was sort of between two marriages, and so I didn't have a family right then. That was an unusual time. Yes, it was. I mean, of course, it's always impossible to compare apples and oranges. I mean, it is the beautiful time. I was 2 years with Orion project, which was building a spaceship propelled by nuclear bombs. So it was it had two wonderful things about it. First of all, it was a wonderful way to explore the universe with this spaceship that would travel around the solar system and visit all the planets and really make a huge difference to the whole space operations, and at the same time get rid of the bombs. It was the only way that I ever saw of getting rid of bombs in large numbers for a useful purpose and not killing people. And so it had two advantages, but it was very exciting, and also it was just interesting technical problems to design the ship and to make sure it would work. And I was working with a group of chemists and engineers and physicists. We could all talk about everything, and so everybody was involved in the whole design of the ship. So it was, in a way, the most satisfying period of my life. I really wasn't doing science. I was working as a nuclear engineer and figuring out what would happen to the bombs and the propellant, which was the stuff you wrapped around the bomb to give it thrust, and then propellant would hit the bottom of the ship, and you had to calculate what would happen there and how much of the ship would be burned away each time by the explosion. And whether the thing succeeded or failed depended on that burning of the skin of the ship. If too much was burned, then it would be a disaster. If not enough was burned, it would be fine. So that was what we were thinking about. And so it was a happy time, and of course we were all young, and we not only thought of building the ship, we expected to fly and actually to go ourselves to visit the planets. People just go up and down to the space station, and it's exciting for them. I mean, Charles Shimoni, who was a friend of mine who did go up into space, but it was not such an adventure as going to Mars. The actual travel only took about 1 day. So it certainly was a great experience for him, but not like exploring Mars. We calculated the original version of Orion would kill somewhere between 1 person and 10 people per flight, which we found unacceptable. So anyhow, this report is explaining how you could actually do much less damage with this reduced version of Orion. And the main reason you could reduce it was by using cleaned up bombs instead of ordinary bombs. These were very, very clean bombs, which reduced the amount of fallout by about 100. So instead of 1 to 10, it would be something between 100th and 1/10 of a human being, and something which we would perhaps find acceptable. But in point of fact, we never knew how to do that. This factor of 100 is just a hope. We never had, in fact, a design for a clean bomb that would work, and we still don't. Yes, the big difference is that when we were starting the project in 1958, the United States and the Soviet Union were exploding big bombs in the atmosphere all the time. That explosions in the atmosphere for military purposes were going on. Much more was being done already in the ordinary way of doing business, so that the public still accepted that. So our addition to that was of the order of 1%, would hardly have been noticeable. But if you go ahead 3 years, Linus Pauling told the world how bad this fallout was, how many people were being killed. Probably of the order of several hundred people actually were killed by that fallout. Linus Pauling made a big campaign out of this, and finally, by 1962, there was a moratorium that both the United States and the Soviet Union stopped testing in the atmosphere and started negotiating the test ban treaty. So the whole atmosphere was totally changed. So if the project had continued, it would have had to have had some kind of renegotiation of the test ban treaty to allow it. And so all that would have made it much more difficult. So very few people at that point took it seriously. This would have had 1,000 tons of payload, so there would have been enough payload for books, certainly, and I didn't have such a huge collection of books at that time anyway. I don't think that would have been a limiting factor. But we certainly had intended to have a lot of notebooks where we would write down on paper what we discovered, and the same way Darwin wrote down things in his notebook when he was traveling on the Beagle. That was sort of the idea we had of being like the old-fashioned naturalists. We would have had about the same kind of space available as Darwin had on his ship. I mean, the Beagle was a small ship, and so Darwin didn't have so much space for his books, but he had enough. And so it would have been like that. Oh, yes. Oh, it was very romantic, yes, indeed. And exploring is a romantic activity, and of course most of the explorers also wrote books about what they had done, and so I was reading a lot of this literature from the explorers. Only after about 2 years it became clear that the thing wasn't going to fly. After that, it remained as a project, but it wasn't exciting anymore, so at that point I left. I think the whole point of life expanding in the universe is there will be enormous diversity. Life loves diversity, and that's what evolution is all about. It's one species becomes 100 species, or else it becomes extinct. I mean, you know, it's never stationary. It always is either goes extinct or else it multiplies and becomes more diversified in all sorts of ways. So I would expect that will continue to happen, that when life gets out in the universe, there'll be all sorts of different species. It won't be one species, it will be millions of species, and there will be many opportunities for trying out different ways of living, and probably we'll try them all. And There will be some places where things go well and other places where things go badly. That's the nature of life. So certainly, I mean, the idea of a final state where things stop changing is to me an illusion. And I look to the future, I think immediately of life expanding into the universe. I mean, that's sort of obvious. That's what's going to happen. So that we are a very transient phase of the history of life, when we just are on the point of going out. So it gives you a completely different feeling about the future, whereas most people are very, at the moment, very dismal about the future. They think of the Earth as sort of a tiny little closed system and too many people on a too small a place, and we're running out of resources and we're becoming overpopulated. And so it's a sort of a dark future for many people. It makes a huge difference whether you think small or you think big. And I think it really matters whether you think big or small. And there will be some places where things go well and other places where things go badly. That's the nature of life. No, I would say I'm happy when I'll be gone fairly soon, and that because I feel myself quite clearly aging. I'm not as smart as I used to be, and so it's downhill from this point onward, and so I'm perfectly happy for that to come to an end. And I don't want to continue downhill forever, but things could be completely different in the future, of course. And